G'day everyone, and welcome to what will be the final episode in this series as we preview the TSF Team Champs of 2024. Before we get underway with the interview today, I wanted to quickly give a shout out and thanks to all of the coaches and interviewees that I've had the pleasure of sitting down with over the last 3 months to preview what is undoubtedly going to be an absolutely epic showdown next week. I also want to pass on my thanks to our sponsor, Manjot's Baking. You can use the code TSF20 at the online store to order yourself any goodies that you would like. They're also going to be there on the day of the meet or on the weekend of the meet. So give them some support because they've done a lot to ensure that this competition can go ahead. I thought it was only fitting that the final episode be an interview of me. I asked my lovely wife, Billie, to compile a bunch of questions and pose them to me. I didn't know any of the questions that were coming, but I thought it would be interesting to, hear my perspective after I've interviewed 20 others and share a little bit of what I find important. So hopefully you enjoy. And if you're watching this before the comp, I look forward to seeing you this weekend. Cheers.
Obviously, I have a pretty unique insight into your brain. We share an office, a gym, a bed, a house. So I hear a lot of your ideas and planning and, the whole thought process behind the Team Champs. We have spoken before about the history of the Team Champs, how it kind of evolved, but I think probably a good starting place is like, what was the inception of the Team Champs? And I think maybe even more importantly off the back of that is why? Like what was the reason behind creating a team event for powerlifting?
I mean, for me, it was missing the team element in just sports in general. Like I didn't grow up doing sports, I suppose, but I started sports like as a 12-year-old. And like the first sport I ever did was athletics, like track and field. And track and field's a lot like powerlifting. It's a team sport. So it's an individual sport, but you actually train as a team. Every Tuesday, Thursday night, you go and train with your mates and you're doing a whole bunch of things together. You go to events together. So like, let's say there's a track meet, it's on a certain event, like states, for example, you all go together. You might sleep together, like in the same accommodation. You travel together, you do your meet. You support each other. It's really fun, even though you're individuals. And then I did Aussie rules, like Australian football, which obviously is a team sport by definition. When I gave up football for lifting, I was just training by myself. I felt like very much a lone wolf, just going to the gym, doing my own thing. And so like, even from the early stages, I was already conscious of this idea, like that lifting was a solo venture. I was fortunate enough to kind of fall into a community pretty early. Like those that would remember Andrew Tang from Obsidian, him and I would train together at Dermot. We met each other at the gym and we're like, hey, I know you from uni. Yeah, we're uni friends. So we trained together and then we recruited more people to train together. Eventually we had a little barbell club at the gym at Dermot. I forget what it was called off the top of my head, but like every Sunday at 2 p.m. we would just meet. Eventually there was 20 of us that would just turn up and we'd all train together. And that was like so fun. And then he obviously started Obsidian. So this idea of team stuff has always been in the back of my mind. And like, I just see it everywhere. Like every sport you look at has team elements to it, like everything, like whether it's athletics, like I said before, you're training together. You've even got relay events. Swimming also has relay events. Gymnastics has team-based sports. Even in sports, if you're not familiar with it, but cycling is an example I use all the time. A lot of people don't realize this, but road cycling is a team sport. Like let's say the Tour de France, everybody knows. I think in the Tour de France, there's 18 teams of 9. So every team's got 9 riders in it. And there's one rider on the team that's the one that's designated as like the one that's trying to win. And the other 8 are simply there to support that top guy. Maybe one or two of the other guys have an opportunity to like win a stage or something. Yes, that's a different thing. But for the most part, the team revolves around, okay, Lance Armstrong is our guy and we need to get him to win the event. So the other cyclists, they're literally competing in the race, but their job is to duck back to the car to grab some gels and bring it back to Lance and say, hey, Lance, you're doing great. And eventually they die off later in the stage and then Lance has to do it himself. And so it's just everywhere. And I remember even going to Worlds, and at Worlds there was a team score at the in the score sheet built in at the bottom of the page. So after the first day or two of lifting, if you check the score sheet online, at the bottom of the page is like the team scores, and there's like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, whatever. No one ever really gave that much attention. Like no one really paid much attention. I paid attention to it. I was like, oh man, Australia doing good in the juniors, whatever. So it's already there in powerlifting. We just don't like lean into it. We don't actually like do anything with it. So kind of formalizing that in a way to make it something that is like, I suppose, credited and almost hyper-focused. Like in our event, we make very little focus on the individual lifter results. Like we do award a best male lifter, we do award a best female lifter, but admittedly those trophies are small, there's no prize money for them. and because we want really the focus to be on the team element to it. So it's always been present.
I like that a lot. I wanted to ask a bit, I probably may expand on what you just said there. I know that you do draw a lot of inspiration from other sporting competitions. You mentioned cycling a lot. Obviously, a lot of your inspiration does come from chess. I'd like to ask a little bit more about like what inspiration do you draw from other sports specifically in not only just the team element of the sport, but even the way that the event, but also the way the event is carried out in terms of like marketing and like entertainment on the day, sponsorship opportunities and things like this. And further, like, yeah, you probably didn't quite answer my question on the last one about the values underpinning the event and the values that reflect the inspiration that you do draw in.
There's a lot to unpack there. There's like multiple elements. I'll go into the other sports thing first. I learned that from Wilks, who's obviously a controversial character in powerlifting, but he was one of my first mentors and coaches. And he would often refer to other sports and say, but look at how this other sport does this. Look at how this other sport does that. And so even early on in my lifting, I was already aware of the idea of like learning from other sports. And it just becomes really obvious to me that like that's how you have to draw. Well, that's where you draw inspiration from, because powerlifting is so small. You don't actually have competitors to learn from. Like now, obviously, we have these segmented federations, and each federation can learn from each other one. But in the past, and hopefully again in the future, when powerlifting's more united, you don't have like a competitor to lean on. You're not like, okay, our gym is doing good, but what's this other gym doing? How can we learn from the other gym to make our business better? That doesn't exist, but it kind of does exist in other sports. And so you're constantly looking at other sports or other events to draw inspiration and to draw motivation or to guide, I suppose, like how you want things to grow. I used those sports previously as an example, but the list is endless. I mean, you mentioned chess. Like chess has a team element as well. You know, I look at things like, using chess as an example, like it's such a huge sport, I guess, if you want to call it that, or a game that has tens of thousands of live viewers online when there's an event on, that has huge content creators, that has a whole like world that sits behind it. And so powerlifting is very different from chess. It's also very different from cycling. It's also very different from football. But what you can do is you can draw you can look for ways to make them similar, or like maybe look for the things in common. So for example, in football, like a football player can play every week. You know, a football player can play all 22 seasons every week. Powerlifter can't compete every week. And so things around like scheduling and seasons, you can't really draw much inspiration from football because that doesn't work like that. But powerlifting is similar to, let's say, athletics, where you have single events. You know, like you have like, okay, there's an Olympics, it's one event. And so everything builds up to this one event. And so maybe powerlifting, maybe like the Olympics or events in the Olympics. So like athletics, swimming or whatever, where there is like a single individual day of championships, that might inspire the way that you might want to schedule a powerlifting event. But the way that, say, big sports like NFL or football or whatnot, the way they market, that might be something that you can still learn from as a powerlifter or powerlifting meet director or whatever, because those things are still in common. So I guess like when you're looking at other sports, you have to think of like where things are relevant, you know, like the way that you market, like, I don't know, the way you market a certain sport might not be relevant to powerlifting because they're just so different, or because they're incompatible in that sense. So I guess like just trying to draw those like equivalences, I suppose.
Nice. And values underpinning the event. I'd love to hear you speak to that.
Well, what does that mean? Like, I understand what your question is.
Team champs is obviously something quite close to your heart. It's one of the biggest things you work on all year, probably one of the real centers of your career at the moment, at least. Why? Like, why is it important that we have a team event? Just because it doesn't exist doesn't seem like a really good enough reason. There's a lot of things that don't exist in powerlifting. Why does it matter to you?
Well, I mean, firstly, it's just really fun. Like, it's just really, really fun to organize. And it's fun to see everyone have a good time, and I think everyone enjoys it. But I think, like, sports is meaningless. Like, ultimately, like, sports is meaningless. Like, you ran faster than the other guy, you threw the ball further, you jumped higher, you lifted more weights. Like, who cares? Like, what difference does it make? And even more so at, like, amateur levels, which is, like, effectively what this is. It's meaningless, like, that someone lifted more than you. And so meaning is only... The meaning that anything ever has is manufactured purely by culture and society. You know, it is meaningful. that someone lifted more weight, because we as a society have decided that that is meaningful. It is meaningful that the Matildas win their soccer game 10-0 because we have decided that that is important. And so meaning is not inherent. It is something that is created and manufactured by the way that we organize things around those things. And so we can create meaning by creating events and by, I don't know, running events like this. And it creates a sense of like, okay, this is now important. Like when like at the first team champs like 5 years ago, it wasn't meaningful to win. Like people didn't care, you know, like in the past, for example, I've been critical of like Melbourne strength culture for not going for the win in whatever year that was, 2019, with Jason's last deadlift. I was critical of it at the time because I thought, you know, they should have really focused on the team result instead of the individual result, but they went for the individual result. Because at the time, the team result didn't have as much meaning as it does now. Whereas now, I think there is already this growing culture of like an understanding like, no, the team result is much more important. And so I can almost like forgive that choice, which I personally saw more meaning in than other people because the meaning hadn't been instilled yet. And so, yeah, going back, I guess, to the original question about like the values, it's like the values are what you want them to be. They can be anything. And so like beyond sports, it's like what is valuable in life and what is valuable, you know, in a very philosophical sense. It's just like society, community, friendship, relationships. And so like there's nothing that's better at fostering that than team sports. Like, I mean, that's what makes sports so good. I mean, I was having a conversation with my friend Alex Hayes a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling me that everything he learned about everything he learned about life, he learned from sports, particularly team sports. And he kind of even said to me jokingly, he's like, I can't imagine someone growing up having never done team sports because everything I know, I learned it from team sports. And so, okay, just because we're adults now doing powerlifting doesn't mean you still can't learn like valuable lessons that are like applicable to all areas of life. And so I think having that kind of team element introduces new dimensions to the event that otherwise don't exist, like this sense of obligation. You know, if you're doing a solo event and you get injured in the lead up, you might pull out. But here it's like, okay, you have an obligation or you have like a duty to your teammates. Or if you were doing a solo event and you got hurt during the event or like you weren't motivated or whatever, it's very easy to throw in the towel with very little consequence. Whereas in this context, it's like, okay, dude, we need you to put together a total so we can score at least 1 point. And so while no one's going to put their hand on your shoulder and say, hey, dude, we need you to put together a total so we can score a point, you know that that's there. And so you kind of have this sense of like, okay, I have to rally my, you know, motivation and energy to accomplish this thing that's bigger than me. You know, that's more than my own personal result, my own personal thing. So there's like infinite lessons to be learned from like all team sports or all team events or anything like this. And so I guess like we can manufacture that meaning by creating an event that year on year builds and grows. Yeah.
I really like that. This year we've obviously had a huge expansion of team champs. The first teams champs was in 2019. No, I've got that wrong, haven't I?
Yeah, 2019 was the first actual team champs, yeah.
Then we had this huge break due to pandemic. Last year was kind of our comeback event, which, you know, we had a lot of, you know, maybe a bit of fear, anxiety around, like, will it carry some of the prestige that it had before we had that 3-year hiatus? This year's kind of like, okay, cool, like we're getting back to work, and you haven't taken that lightly. We've obviously seen the expansion of team champs from a 1-day event to now a 2-day event. We've had the division into the Challengers bracket and the Premier bracket. You've introduced a relegation and promotion system. Why? What was the motivation to take team champs from what it was to what it is now? And like, what is the significance of the changes?
I mean, the significance of the changes is reflected in demand, essentially, because we had so many teams essentially inquiring. I had so many teams pestering me, saying, I want to have a team at Team Champs. I want to blah, 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 blah. And like, I basically capped it at the 13 or 14 we had last year. And then I had another 10 people bugging me. And I was like, okay, maybe we can make it bigger. I had an idea ready for a long time to make it 2 days, but I thought it was going to be too much work. And, you know, it's not ready for that yet. But the spike in popularity almost like created that, like that demand is what pushed it. And I think also in tying into what I was saying before is like, that's what creates more meaning. It's like, it's more meaningful now. Like to win out of 22 teams is much more meaningful than to win out of 13 teams. And, you know, another point to all of this is that when I first started lifting, like when I did my first comp in 2013, I was very lucky because I went to 4 Worldses in a row. I went to Worlds in 2013. I went to Worlds in 2014. I went to Worlds in 2015, and I went again in 2016. And in between that, I did 3 Oceanias. I probably did 3 or 4 or 5 nationals if you count juniors and opens. So competition, and not just competition as in like a meet, but competition in the sense of like actually competing against other people, actually trying to win events, was something I was very used to. It was very like normal. And I think at the more, what I refer to as sub-elite level, a lot of lifters don't get that opportunity. And like that's what makes it fun. You know, like I go to chess every Monday and I'm terrible, but I'm on a level that means I'm competitive and it's fun for me. Because it's like competitive. If I was just getting wiped off the board every week, that wouldn't be fun. If I was wiping people off the board every week, that wouldn't be fun. But like the fact that it's close makes it fun. If competing against other people wasn't fun, people would just do mock meets. They would just, okay, well, I'll just try and total 600 by myself. But when you actually have something to fight for, then it's just so much more, not only fun, but it's actually, you know, the challenge is now there. It creates meaning. It has an importance and significance that it didn't otherwise have. And you can have that in local comps. But anyone that has experience going to local comps will know that a grand majority, I'm going to say maybe 80%, even 90% of lifters who are in close battles for placings in their class either don't even know the score sheet is like that, or they just ignore it. So, you know, I'm watching a comp and there's a coach and their lifter has a 370 kilo total on a second deadlift. And the guy that's winning has 375. I'm like, oh man, they only need to jump 5 kilos to win. And then they jump 10 kilos. And then they miss it and then they lose. And they get silver. And then when they do the medal presentation, they're like, and second place goes to this guy. And I'm like, you didn't even know. Either that or you didn't care. And so you still do have some level of competitiveness at local comps. But there's no meaning there because the difference is like a plastic gold medal or a plastic silver medal. And so you kind of have to manufacture that meaning, in order to create that sense of competitiveness. You know, when you go to nationals, when you go to worlds, of course there's meaning built into the name of the event. It's built into to what it is. You're there trying to win. And so that is the focus. Whereas for most people like that are, you know, budding recreational powerlifters, it's not so competitive. So creating that competitiveness is important. I think that's like one of my major. I mean, there's so many values I could go forever about. You know, encouraging camaraderie and teamworkship and bringing the clubs together is another one that's really important for me. Like having an interclub relationship. You know, I'd like to pride myself in having good relations with all the clubs. I don't see them as competitors. I don't see Elemental or Apex or JPS, who are all neighbors to us, as competitors in the business. I see them as teammates in an industry that's trying to grow. And so I could go on forever, but like, I mean, I guess some of the major ones are like what I described, and also creating an environment of competitiveness for people that might not otherwise get that opportunity.
I really like all of that. My next question probably expands on my last one, which is, how has it been bringing this year's team champs to life? So obviously there has been an expansion to 2 days, the introduction of this relegation promotion system. You have done a lot more this year too, in terms like this introduction of interviewing the coaches and all the marketing sort of surrounding that. You only arrived back in Australia 3 months ago. It's been pretty like hit the ground running. What's it been like bringing this year's event to fruition? What challenges have you faced? What are you anxious about? What are you excited about?
Look, it's been a lot, obviously, but I think the biggest difference in this comp versus other events that we've organized is that I have the time to actually dedicate it to it. You know, you mentioned doing the interviews and stuff, like even stuff like this. Previously, I just never had the time. And that's because I was coaching in the gym. You know, I was coaching 25, 30 hours a week, physically in the gym, another 15, 20 hours online. That's already a full-time job. Excuse me. Managing the business stuff, like, you know, constantly answering emails, paying bills, forwarding emails to you to pay the bills. And so when it comes to like, it was like running events, that was very much on the secondary thing. It was very much like when I've got spare time, I'll do it. Okay, quickly, I'll organize this. Whereas obviously we have a really good team now, and Josh and Jeremy, I'm in the gym much less. I'm probably doing 2 shifts a week, like maybe 8 hours of coaching a week, maybe 10 or 12. And I'm still very busy, but like now actually I'm busy only because I've created busyness. I've gone, okay, well, I'm going to create graphics and I'm going to do interviews and I'm going to do all these different things that I just otherwise have never had time to make that Instagram account that we have. So yeah, it's been really good. It feels good to actually, it's, in the past, it has always been a passion project, and it still is, obviously, but one that's kind of like latches onto the very little energy that I have as I'm going. Whereas this time around, I actually have like dedicated time and energy. It's not like whatever scraps of energy I've got left, I'm going to go do that for Team Champs work. It's like, no, I'm actually blocking out time in my calendar, like today, to go, okay, cool, let's do that interview. Okay, let's do this. Okay, I'm going to go to the shop and make sure I buy proper speakers, and I'm going to upgrade this. And like, I actually have time, energy, and resources, in terms of having you and Josh and Jeremy to cover some of the work that I was previously doing, which means I can actually free myself up to dedicate myself to this project. So it's been good. It's been very tiring, obviously. Not without its hurdles. But yeah, it's been good.
How do you see like meet directors like playing a role in powerlifting as a sport? Obviously, like we've kind of joked that historically a meet director is a bit of a volunteer role. There's historically been very little benefit to running meets outside of just a sense of fulfillment and having a good time with your friends and community. Do you think that powerlifting needs more people like this doing things like this in order to create good sporting opportunities and good events? Is it enough to have a nationals and a team event international for those that make it to that level? Like, how does powerlifting grow at this like sub-elite level, like you mentioned earlier? How does it grow in the absence of meet directors? Do we need more people willing to do stuff like this? What do you see?
I mean, like, the meet director role is one that's not clearly defined. Like, it's not like a spotter or loader where you've got a clear job. Like, I mean, obviously the meet director role is clearly defined in some sense, but you kind of often fall into it. Like, you own the gym, so now you're a meet director. A good example that I think of is like JPS, when they have, I don't know if they still do, to be honest, Chris Nicola as their meet director. It wasn't Jake or Sam who were the business owners. They actually had someone not external, obviously it was internal, but someone separate to those two, to organize their events. When we had Lizzie doing it as well, that was fantastic. And I wish she could continue to do it. Come back. But it's often, and it historically has been a role that's kind of like been overlooked a little bit, as like how much influence and power you have. But also, like, powerlifting is a kind of sport where things are the way they are, so to speak. It's very much like that's just the way it is. And so I don't consider myself typically a very creative person. I'm not good at photography. I'm not good at painting, the classic. I'm not good at music. But I think, like, in many ways, meet directing is my creative expression. And I mean, you'll be the first to attest to like the creativity that comes to me when I think about running comps. And I've been to such a broad range of comps, whether it's local level in Australia, international, in different countries where they do things differently. In the US, they do things slightly differently. In Russia, they do things slightly differently. And then in other federations like Pro Raw, I've been to GPC comps, and I'm always picking things and learning things. And like we just talked about before, other sports, like I can't help but go to the Australian Open, and like I'm noticing things of like, oh, like how could that be relevant in powerlifting? Like I remember actually there was an interview with Novak Djokovic, just to take an aside, where he was kind of complaining about a new rule that they changed. And so the rule was that spectators can't move between seats until there's a change of ends. And so if there's a point going on, or even if the point's not actually going on, like even if there's like that 20-second break or 30-second break between points, you're not allowed to get out of your chair. You can only get out of your chair and move when there's a change of ends, which happens every 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the length of the game, of each game. They changed it to make it, instead of it every change of ends, it was every game. So basically twice as often, more or less, to give spectators the opportunity to move around a little bit better. They can leave the stadium if they're not enjoying the game or whatever it might be. So it was a thing that the meet director, I think his name's Chris Tiley, I'm probably getting that wrong, did to enhance the experience of the volunteers, of the spectators. And what Novak said was, while it's annoying for us as players because it's more disturbance, we understand that it's there to enhance the spectator experience. And like, I just really like that wording, because it was like, yes, like that is also a consideration as a meet director. You need to consider spectators. A spectator is going to have a good time. A spectator is going to have a good time. You got to consider obviously the athletes. How can you make the event as smooth and successful for the athletes as possible? You need to consider every single person, volunteers, referees. How can you make this the best experience ever? I was having a conversation with Andy last week about spotting and loading, and he talked to me about potentially doing a safety briefing to the athletes to make sure they're not dumping bars, because it's one of his pet peeves. It's also one of mine. And dumping bars, it was so interesting because the perspective he gave me was something that not that I hadn't thought of, but it tied into something that I hadn't thought of very much. And it was that we think of dumping a bar on a squat as bad because it's dangerous. He says it's bad because it makes spotters not want to spot again. And I was like, man, that is actually a perspective that you don't think about. It's like if you're a spotter and you have a bar dumped on you, you don't want to spot again. And so we're always wondering, how is it so hard to find volunteers? Because volunteers don't enjoy it, because the meet director doesn't think, how can I make the spotting experience as good as I can do? And so like a small thing that I do is, instead of having 4 spotters and loaders, we have 7. So the spotters and loaders are resting, they're rotating, they're not getting overworked, the fingers aren't getting smashed because they're spotting 300 kilo squats for an hour. That's a small thing. Feeding the volunteers, obviously classic, providing them with water, giving them rest breaks, providing them with apparel and little gifts like that, providing them gloves. All of a sudden you've spotted and loaded, and then you go to your training on Monday and your friend says, did you spot and load on the weekend? And you go, yeah. And then your friend says, oh, how bad is it? And then the guy goes, no, it was actually fine. You know, because they've had such different experiences. The first guy never wants to spot and load again. The second guy's like, it was fun. It was great. See, it wasn't that tiring. My elbows feel fine. Whereas the first guy says, when I spotted and loaded, my elbows were fucked. Yeah, well, that's because you were the only one. And so the meet director has so much power. Going back to your original question, the meet director has so much power to influence the experience of everybody involved, from, like I described, all those different people. And so it is hard, because you oftentimes, or sometimes at least, there's going to be conflicting decisions. So for example, in our space, like at TSF, we're a small gym. If we bring the partitions back, it gives the spectators more space, but it makes the warm-up room smaller. If we bring the partitions forward, the warm-up room gets slightly bigger, but there's less space for spectators. So there's going to be like obvious conflicts like that. And there are many more that are much more subtle. And so as a meet director, you've got to make these decisions about, like, where do you devote your time, resources, who's more important in this? Okay, I've got a spare $1,000. Do I use it to buy better food for the volunteers? Or do I use it to upgrade the speakers? Or do I use it to pay a security guard at the front door? Like, I don't know, like whatever it might be. There's so many things you could spend $1,000 on. So where do those resources go? So there's a lot to consider, but I just guess, to summarize what I was saying, the meet director just has a lot of power, and it would be naive to think that these are small decisions, I suppose.
I want to go back to what you said before about the experience of the spectators. Powerlifting has not historically been a huge spectator sport. We've seen some change in that in Sheffield. I want to ask what you think at, like, sort of the local, this sub-elite level. What do you see as being opportunities to improve the spectator experience that other meet directors and ourselves can, like, work on and improve in order to make powerlifting more enjoyable and also to bring more involvement, more participation, and even more money into the sport?
Creating a good spectator experience is challenging because there's a lot to consider. Again, you have to use other sports. Most people, I'll ask you, what do you think of the sport of cycling? Do you enjoy watching cycling?
No, not really.
Right. And I think that's a common response. A lot of people would say cycling is pretty boring to watch. Yet the Tour de France has the highest viewership of any sport in the world, maybe only rivaled to the Olympics, which is a multi-sport event. So does it really count? The Tour de France attracts 10 million live spectators. 10 million people line the roads to watch people ride by on a bike across the course of a few minutes. To me, that is like a really, really cool example of not a thought experiment, but something to reflect on. You know, a sport that is considered boring, because that's the thing, is a lot of people write off powerlifting and say powerlifting is a boring sport. Nobody's going to watch it. Yeah, but so is cricket. So is soccer. So is cycling. So is swimming. Yeah, these are sports that have multi-million-dollar budgets, multi-billion-dollar industries. And so I think calling powerlifting as boring, inherently boring, as the reason why it's not more spectator-friendly, maybe in part is related, but I don't think is enough to explain the lack of viewership that we see. Again, using another sporting example, you look at like the soccer or the football for my European friends. You look at like the Australian women's team, the Matildas, right? I would say probably more popular than the Socceroos right now.
They're way more popular.
Way more popular. I couldn't name a single Socceroo. I couldn't name a single human being on the male soccer team for Australia. But I know practically the whole women's team. And is it because I'm a huge feminist and I'm really passionate about women's sport?
Yes.
Or is it because, what is it? Soccer Australia, whatever they're called, have done a good job of like marketing this group of people, this team, creating storylines, making it interesting to watch, having good broadcast rights, like blah, 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 all those other things that like kind of make it interesting to watch as a spectator. You think back to 2008 when Australia made the World Cup for the first time. That was such a huge storyline. Like Australia were like the underdogs, we hadn't been in the World Cup for so long. And then, we made it past this certain qualifying process. And then we had to play whoever it was it Uruguay or something, to win. And then John Aloisi scored that goal. And it was like an iconic memory, And off the back of that, there was a huge wave of soccer fanship. And we're seeing the same thing happen now on the women's side. And it's potentially going to die off in the next few years, once like the high kind of like rolls around. And so you got to look at other sports like this and take those lessons and say like, well, how can we create that in powerlifting? How can we create that investment? Like I personally, I don't engage in what I would call like idolization. I don't care much for celebrities. If I was walking on the street and like, I don't know, Usain Bolt walked past, I probably wouldn't bat an eyelid. I'd be like, oh, well, that's cool. And I'd keep walking, except maybe if it was like, I don't know, Magnus Carlsen or like Taylor Swift or something. Maybe Taylor Swift would make me go like, holy shit, that's sick. I'll pull my phone out. But other than that, I don't really engage in idolization. But a lot of people do. And that's not a negative thing. It's just that a lot of people are interested. They follow these storylines. But you have to create a storyline. Otherwise, there's nothing to do. Like, do you know who does this better than anyone? Paparazzis and magazines. They create storylines. This person cheated on this person. We saw this person with that person. We got a photo of that person having a coffee. We got a photo of this guy's arm hanging out the window, and that looks like this person's arm. They just create stories out of nothing.
Are you suggesting we need a powerlifting paparazzi?
We need a powerlifting paparazzi to say, Edwina jumped from TSF to 3PP.
How dare.
Right. It's like, those are the storylines. Like, those are the things like that make it interesting. Like, we joke about the Chads being like the villains of it and stuff. But like, their interview got more views than any other interview. And like, no offense to Tom, but I don't think a lot of people know who Tom Glover is prior. Like, he wouldn't have as much of a reputation in powerlifting as someone like a Victor Liu or a Didier or a Sam Skepis. But more people tuned into the Chad's interview than any other interview. I mean, we're talking in the hundreds, right? And I'm not pretending that I'm like on the same level as the Matildas or the Olympics, but soon. But to me, that was really interesting because they really lent into it. They really made a big deal to like be the villains and to create this storyline of like, this team that's not even a team. Can they take the win? Like, it was awesome. And so how do we make it more spectator friendly? I think it needs to come around to storylines. There has to be something interesting to pay attention to. The absolute lifts are important, obviously, like the actual physical talent of it. Look at Sheffield. There's a reason people follow Sheffield because it's the best of the best. But there's just so much more to it than that. This conversation I had last week with someone is that like the difference between running 100 meters in 9.8 seconds and 9.4 seconds is imperceivable. So we don't really care about how fast people are lifting or how much weight they're lifting. What we care about is how meaningful is that lift or that run. When Usain Bolt wins his 12th Olympic gold medal in 3 Olympics and becomes the only man to have ever done it in athletics, that is hugely meaningful. We're like, holy shit, this is significant. Nobody's ever done this. That's amazing. I'm so glad I was tuned in. Where were you when Usain Bolt won his 12th gold medal? And that was probably more meaningful than his world records that were done at other events. And so we need to create meaning. You need to create like a sense of like importance in everything. And like I said before, like that meaning has to be manufactured somehow. And so that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's like, it's cool to see this happening in powerlifting now, obviously through Team Champs. And like, we're obviously kind of running this event on a much smaller scale, but at the same timeline that kind of Sheffield's coming onto the scene and is creating these stories in powerlifting that bring some more significance to the sport, that gives some personality behind the competitors, so they are people that we actually care about and we have invested in interest in their performance. So.
Right. I mean, like perfect example is like what you're talking about Sheffield is like they did the Road to Sheffield series.
Yeah, those fantastic interviews, the long form, right?
Right. And like you saw that video with Bertleby. I was trying to remember her actual name. I don't even know what it is. It's only Instagrams that I know.
Brittany Schlatter.
Yeah, Brittany Schlatter. It's like those types of like videos. I think he's even like Carlos Griffith or whatever. His video is awesome as well. It's like creates a storyline. You're like, okay, cool. I know who this is now, and I'm invested in their result. I want them to do well or badly, or whatever it might be, because you know who they are and you know it has meaning now. Whereas if they're just like faceless names, it's like, well, some faceless name squatted 450 kilos. Like, I don't care. But when you hear the story of how they overcame poverty and they did this thing and now they had to deal with haters and then they got injured and then now they're achieving, you're like, whoa, this is amazing. But their other rival is also a cool guy. I kind of like them too. But they've got a rivalry because last time that guy won and now he's trying to get, like that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes sports interesting. So it's challenging because like lifting doesn't have a really clear circuit. There's no like, year-on-year season. Like the closest thing you have to that is the World Championship cycle, which is every year. But even that, it's not like a continuous event. It's very much like every year is a separate year, and so you don't have that huge storylines there. Like there can be a little bit, like last year Taylor Atwood lost to so and so. Can he take the win back? Like that's there, but not as like ingrained as maybe other events in sports. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. I'm excited about the continuity of team champs now and having these implications year to year with the promotion and relegation systems that we have now. I want to ask, where do you see team champs going in the future? Even just hearing you talk about this now with, for example, these long form interviews of Road to Sheffield, for example, like there's a lot of possibility, I guess, surrounding team champs of what we can do with it in the future. Where do you see team champs in like 1 year, 5 years, 10 years from now? Like, where's it going?
Oh man. Look,
you can answer this twice, one with like finances being a consideration and one where we don't even have a budget.
Right. Like one is like just chilling, and the other one is like you marry a multi-billionaire on the side. And
I'm willing for us to divorce for this.
Look, where is it going? I think, okay, so like this is another interesting point about how you demand value and importance and respect. And I think one of the most important thing is trajectory, not location. And I say this is actually applicable to a lot of things in life. Trajectory, not location. It's not about where you are, it's about where you're going, and people can see that. And so, for example, like we're putting up $4,500 of prize money, which is a lot to me because it's my money, our money.
Our money.
But objectively, it's not a lot of money. It's not a lot. Like there's that comp in Hobart that's putting up 6,000. I know Pro Raw put up like 20,000 or something ridiculous. I know that the APL something's put up even more than that. I think they have like a invitational. But you can't just put in money and demand like that it's important. You can't of course money does create meaning in some sense, but like whether it's, like Sheffield obviously put like £500,000 on the line. But like what I'm trying to do, what I'm really trying to do is show the trajectory. For example, the first year it was $1,000 prize money. Actually, the year before that was the end of year challenge was 500, and then it was 1,000, and then it was 2,000, and then it was 3,000, and now it's 4.5. And like
we got to talk about that.
Well, you promised. For context, Billie vowed. This is vowed a past verb. Said in her vows that she could let me put up whatever prize money I want for team champs. I'm going to overlay that here.
Gonna eat my words.
But kind of like how you can't go backwards on your attempt weights. You can't squat 100, fail, and then go down to 95. We can't go backwards. Like it has to go forwards, even if it's only 500, but preferably 1,000 every year. To show it's like this is the trajectory we're going on. We want to make things bigger. We want to make things better. There is more budget. There is more of everything. And so where is it going to go? I don't know. Like there are certain steps that are small in terms of costs that make differences. So things like, this year we're upgrading our speakers, which is like a relatively small thing. It means that the announcer will be better heard. Okay, small improvement. Then there are other steps that are like really large, and to get there, it's kind of like, I don't know, like for example, like going from 1 day to 2 days. It's like 13 teams in a day, fine. 14 teams in a day, fine. 15 teams in a day, probably the limit. You can't do 16. The only way to get to 16 is to go across 2 days. And if you're going to go across 2 days, well, you might as well get to 22, which is what we got this year. So it's kind of like, there's a lot of those things where it's like, if you're going to go that one little step further, it's a lot harder. Like to go from 1 day to 2 days is a big jump. So to make it worth it, you have to kind of expand quickly. And so like an example of that would be like changing locations, like venues. Like I would love to run TSF team champs at a different venue, like a better venue, a bigger venue. But making that jump is so big, and like that can only happen once. Clearly there's the budget. That's probably the biggest thing, because then you've got to haul equipment out of the gym. Like we've got all the equipment ready on site. It takes 4 hours to set up on a Friday afternoon before the comp. Whereas if we were going to run it at a hall or a venue, it's going to take all day Friday. We're going to need multiple trucks and vans to ship all the equipment in. We're going to need to set up the AV there. I don't know how the AV would work. We'd have to hire out a venue that costs hundreds, if not thousands, across a weekend. Like that jump from our venue to another venue is so big. And so I'm super impressed that other gyms do it. Like I know Pro Raw used to do it at the Frankston Arts Centre. I know that obviously Sheffield happens at Town City Hall, whatever that is in Sheffield. So there's lots of things like that are like, I don't know, in the back of my mind, but I'm also being realistic. I've talked about multi-day events, like the 3-day event. I don't know if I want to do that. That's getting quite big. The team event could be expanded to anything. It could become like a season. Like I've talked about doing like multi-month comps, where rather than going across 2 days, it goes across like 6 months, and you do a meet a month.
I equal parts love and hate this idea.
Yeah, like so the idea for the multi-meet would be, imagine you ran a meet, like say every month, right? Like let's call it the first Sunday of every month. That's already tiring just thinking about it. But imagine you ran a meet every month for the first Sunday of every month for like 5 or 6 months. And so you have the same teams competing every month, but not the same people. That's the key. Is like, obviously, like we spoke before, you can't compete every month. But maybe you have a team of like 8 or a team of 10. And every month you've got to put in 4. And so you've got to be strategic about which 4 you put in, because you got to rest them and pick them at the right times. And then you accumulate it across the season. Like that's an idea I have. I don't know if anybody has a bigger budget and wants to do that. They can take my idea. I'd be happy for that. And I can help you out. But there's a lot of ideas. And it's like one is I've got a lot of ideas now that I can't act on. And 2, there are many more ideas that I can't even imagine that'll come to me every time there's another event. New things come up, new ideas, blah, blah, blah. So where is it going to be in 1, 5, and 10 years? I don't know. I'd like to think that in 5 years or 10 years, we have like a really stable reputation. I don't personally have like ambitions to make it like this multinational, like $100,000 prize money thing. Like I don't want to do this multi-state national level kind of thing, because I think a lot of the charm that Team Champs has is that it's in Melbourne. And I'd almost probably prefer it stay that way, like keep it a Melbourne-based thing. And maybe like there is a team element that becomes a bigger thing, like you could have like a Team Champs or a national Team Champs, that's run by the federation, not by me. So like, let's say USAPL Australia or like APA or whatever. Imagine they had their own team event. That would be cool with me. But like that wouldn't be my Team Champs. Like the TSF Team Champs would always be, I think, like a quote unquote more local kind of thing, because I think it's important to have that like that local influence. But yeah, I mean the sky's the limit. I mean actually the limits really are credit, but other than that, the sky's the limit.
I love the idea of a powerlifting season, and like rather than just having say 4 all-star lifters from a club, actually like sort of saying to these top coaches, like show us the depth of your talent.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that actually really excites me, and I love the idea of that. But I've never heard you say this before, which is astonishing because I've heard a lot of your ideas many times. But what you said about like the charm of Team Champs being that it is a smaller scale event, I actually really love that. It's like there are these events that are like global and they carry all this prestige and they're super incredible. But there is something, particularly charming about like we battle it out with our friends, like we battle it out with our peers, and like it has really brought the Melbourne powerlifting community so much closer. Like seeing TSF absolutely pumping with people training that have come to visit for Team Champs in the lead up to the event, like. I love that. And I think that, there's a lot to be said about not just getting carried away with like how big can I make something, but rather like maybe how charming can I make something. And I really like that. Yeah.
I mean, like, for example, even looking at the lifter list now, there are so many people that are like have multi relationships, or like the way that you draw the like, what's it called? Not tree diagram, but where you go like little dots and the links between them.
Like on the police board.
The org chart.
Yeah.
No. But there's so many links, like so many people are like, oh, I'm going to nominate this person as our assistant coach, but the assistant coach happens to lift for another team, but their coach happens to lift for this team. Like it's just so many levels like this. And I love that, man. I love that. Like it's going to feel so good. Like, I mean, there's some obvious examples like the guys at 3PP who I've already mentioned, there's like 3 teams out of their gym, or 2 teams plus JY at Avia. But then the people that train at Avia that are lifting for Lulift, and Lulift also coaches Chris White, who runs Stronghold. And so the links just go on forever. Like they go in all directions. And so, I mean, like I think it would be a shame to be like, for it to grow so big that, the little guys kind of get lost in the weeds, which I don't think we're going to grow that big.
Yeah, we could be that big, but we're more interested in the charm.
Yeah, the charm is part of the charm.
I love that. I think that's important. All right, I'm going to sort of speak a little bit more now about this year's event specifically and the competition. My first question is, why did we let the Chads in?
Why?
Why?
They were a team. They sent me an email. They said,
they weren't a team when they first inquired.
Yeah, but, we needed 22, and like, although we had a lot of inquiries, it was hard to actually get people organized enough to organize themselves. Like, for example, like Alex Deacon pulled out. Hustler didn't put together a team. So while we had a lot of interest, there was also a lot of flakiness. So And I wanted it to be even. I wanted there to be 22 teams. And so Tom messaged me and was like, hey, can we make a team? I was like, all right, as long as there's 4 of you and 1 coach, then we're happy for that. And he's like, no, we'll just all coach ourselves. I'm like, no, you won't. That's not how it works. So yeah, why not? Like, I mean, in my mind, the definition of a team is 1 coach and 4 lifters. And whether or not you're all coached by the same person, like day to day, it's impossible to police. So why would you even begin to police that now? And I know there are lots of teams who are coached by other people outside. You know, for example, like Beck Potterledge, I use as an example. She literally is lifting for Lioness. She's not actually the head coach of Lioness, I don't think, but her coach is Alex of 3PP. So there's lots of those cases where people are being coached by people that aren't necessarily the same. You know, not everyone's a Lou Lift where they're all coached by Victor Lou. Not everyone's a TSF where they're all coached by TSF. And so why do you draw the line against, you know, just a group of mates? And I think they're actually a great storyline, to be honest. I'm glad they're in.
I love this storyline. I'm glad they're in too. But I do wonder why they're in.
That's my
predictions. Answer. I want to know your predictions of the day. I want to hear top 3 picks, first of all. Who's winning? Who's taking it out?
Look, I've said since the start, Melbourne Strength Culture, they're probably still continuing to be my top pick. I know a lot of people are kind of leaning on Panthers at the moment. I just think lifting on day 1 is going to be too hard. And I think, for example, Scott Mirkeljohn, who's in the 90 class, he'll have a hard time holding his...
Panthers?
For Panthers.
Yeah.
He'll have a hard time holding his spot. You know, he's got Frank and Mitz competing on day 2. And, like, he's just going to be like a sitting duck to get his total picked off. And Mitz and Frank are freaking machines. So I do think Panthers will be high up there. Obviously, the Chads will be high up there. I also know that a few people have kind of like counted out Abby Stronell of MSC against Lotta of Apex. I think that's going to be an awesome battle. But I actually think that Abby is going to fucking kill it. I think like Abby is so freaking strong and really experienced. I know that so is Loda. I don't know her very well, but I know she is. So I think if Abby can get a win, if Lena can score well, I think even Lena can win. I can't remember exactly the 56 class. Natasha should win her class in the 48s, and then Deuce is going to blow away the 60s. I think it would be really hard to see MSC losing. Unless Abby does lose, for example, and then unless Lena also kind of falls behind the pace, and then you've kind of like coughed up some points there. But yeah, if I have to name it, my pick, being a week out, number 1, Melbourne Strength Culture. Number 2, I'm going to have to say the Chads, much to my dismay. And number 3, let me just quickly pull up my little thingos. Who do I think is going to be number 3? I've got to put on record, right? Number 3 is going to be maybe Elemental. That's probably my top 3. Yeah, so let's do that. What did I just say? MSC, Chads, Elemental. And I think the winners of day 1 will be...
the Chads.
Well, not by definition, because, you know, for example, Panthers could win day 1 and then lose placings and then end up not actually winning, end up falling behind the Chads, you know, for example.
I fully didn't recognize that could happen.
Because you could be winning at the end of day 1, but then lose placings, but then the other team doesn't lose placings. And so you end up actually falling behind. Yeah, so it's like this extra level of like thinking you got to have.
Whoa.
Yeah. So who's going to win day 1? Probably Panthers. Because, for example, on day 1, Scott Mickeljohn should win the 90s. But, for example, after day 2, he could fall to 3rd, so they lose 3 points. Whereas maybe the Chads finish 2nd on day 1, but they don't lose any points. Like, their placings stay intact. And so they end up leapfrogging Panthers, even though they lost on day 1. So there's like a lot of like kind of like these kind of weird things that can happen. I do think Panthers could win day 1, though. Yeah, that's gonna be my prediction. Who do you think's gonna win? I need to hear your prediction as well. Actually, I don't know if you've given it much thought.
I haven't given it much thought, and like honestly, all of my ideas are not my own. They're just kind of what I've hijacked from what I've heard from other people. So we'll gloss over that. So to clarify, the teams getting promoted, are they the top 3 from the challengers bracket at the end of day 1, or are they the top 3 from the challengers bracket at the end of day 2?
At the end of day 1, it's top 4.
Top 4, sorry.
So top 4 at the end of day 1, because for them, you can't make it at the end of day 2 because it's like then they don't get a fair chance to fight amongst themselves.
Yes.
So it's like at the end of day 4, it's the top 4. And even if you lose, like let's say you come 4th on day 1 to, let's say, I don't know, for example, SR's Collective finish 4th and Avia finish 5th. But then after day 2, they swap places. Well, SR still get promoted because they're the one that finished top 4 after day 1.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's like this
there's
thing.
layers in this.
Yeah,
there's
layers.
more layers.
So basically the way it works is the way you can think of who's in the top 11 for next year, you look at the final placings. You remove whoever finished from top 4 on day 1. Just remove them from the list. And then it's the next best 7.
Yeah.
That's like the easiest way to think about it.
Okay. Who's getting promoted for next year?
Well, clearly the Chads and the Panthers, I think, were the easy choices there. Who else? Man, it's going to be so... And then the thing is, everything below that is so freaking tight.
Avia,
Stronghold? SI Collective, Stronghold. It's very hard. I think Stronghold is almost one of my top picks to get promoted from the top 4, from them 4. And I want to say... Yeah, probably Avia. I think it'll be Avia, Stronghold, Chads, and Panthers are the top 4 from day 1. But I said this in the last podcast, which you didn't listen to. I also wouldn't be surprised if even another team got promoted again. Because remember, it's top 7 after you remove the 4. So someone that comes 5th on day 1 could still be in the top 7 overall. Like because the challenges are so competitive. Like they're actually really good.
The challenges is so competitive.
Yeah, so there is that chance, although I don't see it being likely. But yeah, those are my 4 to get promoted.
So we're 1 week out from the team champs now. What are you most looking forward to next weekend? Competition, community, environment. What are you excited for?
It's obviously unfair to say everything. I think from a more global point of view, obviously just having everyone together, like it's kind of the first comp of the year where everyone's like together since, Christmas and since nationals and whatnot. So to see all your mates from different gyms, that's just going to be really good. Like everyone's going to be in a really good mood. Everyone's going to be really positive, I'd like to think. So the social aspect is obviously a big part of it. From an actual lifting point of view, I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot of the bigger boys, particularly. So like the 90 class, 100 class, 110. Looking forward to seeing how the Chads go, obviously. Looking forward to seeing how Frank and Mitz go in the 90 class against our guy Greg. And then from the women's side, like definitely excited to see how Deuce goes, like I mentioned before, and even the 67.5 kilo class, like that Abby versus Loda matchup is like top tier. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how that pans out. Of course, like in general, like the whole TSF crew, I'm just looking forward to seeing how our 4 fare. They've got their work cut out for them, but it'll be really fun, and I think it'll be a good challenge for them. And I'm looking forward to it being over. I'm looking forward to having some free time. I'm looking forward to not lying in bed and doing this. The meme of like, what about this? Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So
I'm looking forward to seeing you.
Yeah. So as fun as it's been, I'm looking forward to having a bit more time on my hands until Team Champs for 2025 prep starts, which won't be very far away. So yeah, I guess I'm looking forward to it all, and I'm looking forward to hitting my pillow on Sunday night. That's gonna feel good. Yeah, it's gonna feel really good.
Hell yeah. Thanks for giving me your time today, John Paul. It's an absolute pleasure being here with you, and we'll see you next weekend.
I'm glad you've enjoyed it, and thank you for being my little, not really dummy, but whatever it is, for being you.
For hosting you.
Yeah, thanks for that. All right. Love you.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.